All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and on behalf of, or good morning or good afternoon, if you're further east from here, and maybe some joining from as far as Australia, good evening, I presume. On behalf of the Marine Corps University, the Norwegian Defense University College, the Marine Corps University Foundation, welcome to this week's Arctic Security Symposium. This is day 2. Yesterday we had a fantastic series to kick it off. This is an inaugural series exploring the policies, strategies, and tactics underpinning security in the High North. I am your host today. I'll be moderating the panel. My name is Colonel Brian Cole. I am the director of the Joint Warfare course at the Marine Corps War College, and also a co-founder of the Marine Corps University's Arctic Strategic Initiative. Before we begin, please remember that all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of Marine Corps University and Norwegian Defense University College or any other agency of the U.S. or the Norwegian government. We will be recording this panel for the benefit of those in our community of interest who would not be able to join us today. So we ask that you keep mindful of keeping your microphones on mute to avoid disrupting the presentation, as well as turn your webcams off to help us stream smoothly. At the conclusion of our guest presentation, we will have a question and answer session. And so if you have a question, please type it in the group chat, and then we will then ask your question to the panel on your behalf. Please note that we will only be able to answer or accept questions via the WebEx chat, and that the Facebook live stream will not be active for question and answer portion. So I'm excited to introduce the panel today. Our panel is this morning is the U.S. with NATO in the Arctic, an extremely important strategic discussion that to be had. And we've got several guests. We'll start with who we were introduced to yesterday, Brigadier General Douglas Clark. He is joining us coming back from Norway for this event from NATO's Joint Warfare Center. General Clark is the first Marine Corps general who is the deputy commander of the Joint Warfare Center and also its chief of staff. General Clark came from the Joint Enabling Capabilities Command, part of U.S. Transcom in Norfolk, Virginia, and where he was the detachment commander. And those are familiar with the JEC understand the extremely important role that plays. Also joining us virtually is Professor Trey Braun. Professor Trey Braun is a national security strategy and policy professor at the U.S. Army War College Strategic Studies Institute. His research currently focuses on North American security with an emphasis on Arctic security and U.S. national resiliency. Professor Braun has had a 30-year career in the Army, and which included 20 years of tactical aviation. So shout out to another tactical aviator. He's been an operational planner and an aviation force management in force management assignments. And the last 10 years he spent in the service was in the senior Army force management assignments. Also joining us then is the authors of extremely important article, which actually is the namesake of this symposium. And we have sitting next to me here is Dr. Strauss, who you probably also were introduced to yesterday if you were tuning in. Dr. Strauss is a professor here at the Command and Staff College, and he's a professor of military history and war studies, and has become one of our leading Arctic experts here at the university. Before he was here, he was a visiting professor at the Army War College, as well as the Appalachian State University. And he's working on several books, he was authoring several things at this time on U.S. military intelligence and surveillance of the home front during the First World War. He's writing an article on U.S. war powers and influence of national security versus civil liberties, an important topic in the First World War. And also the author of the Marine Corps Concepts in NATO's Northern Flank for the Arctic Review on Law and Politics. And joining us also is one of his two other co-authors. We have with us recently retired Lieutenant Colonel Mike Byrne. It's good to see you again, Mike. Mike was the the Associate Dean for Academics at the Marine Corps War College. And before that, he was a Professor of Military Studies here at the Command and Staff College. And he is currently working at the MAGTAF Staff Training Program. MAGTAF, for those who don't know. So yes, he's at the MAGTAF Staff Training Program, and the MAGTAF is the Marine Air Ground Task Force, kind of the core of the structure of the Marine Corps. And he was also a student at the equivalent to the Command and Staff College in Norway as well. So it's good to see you again, Mike. And then also the third author on this extremely important article that will be discussed today is Lieutenant Colonel Gordinier. Lieutenant Colonel Gordinier, Ryan, is a infantry officer in the Marine Corps. He is a graduate of the Command and Staff College here, and also went on to the School of Advanced Warfighting, extremely rigorous course here at the War College. He's a distinguished graduate of the Command and Staff College. And then he's gone on to serve as a MAGTAF planner, and then in March of 2020, assumed command of 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines. So welcome, Ryan.
Thanks.
So let's just start because this is a NATO and U.S. Discussion this morning with General Clark at the Joint Warfare Center, and some of us, maybe in the audience, are quite familiar with what the role of the Joint Warfare Center is. I wonder if you might be able to fill us in a little bit more, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. First, thanks so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. Yesterday was extremely beneficial to me, learning from the presentations, and so I really appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts. I do work at what we call the JWC, the Joint Warfare Center in Stavanger, Norway. For those of you who are not familiar with it, as I was not when the Commandant told me I was going there, if you Google JWC NATO, you will see Stavanger, Norway, and you'll see the link to our web presence. And I would encourage everyone to go check it out. There's some good content and some good connections within our higher echelons throughout all of NATO, and it shares what we do. A 2 or 3 sentence excerpt from that page says that the Joint Warfare Center provides NATO's training focal point for full spectrum joint operational level warfare, directly supporting the missions of Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, SACT, and Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, SACEUR. JWC drives the delivery of collective training and warfare development at the operational and strategic levels of warfare. JWC serves as NATO's trusted advisor, bridging transformation and operations, underpinning NATO readiness and future capability development. We conduct command post exercises. We don't do live fire exercises. We don't work at the tactical edge. We stay up focusing on the Joint Force Command entities and those 3- and 4-star level, higher level echelons, and putting them through the rigors of highly impacting NATO secret classified scenarios to challenge those staffs. And I will say we put a lot of time and effort into current modern scenarios in order to drive those staffs with as much currency as we can to challenge those staffs using injects that are developed by the training audience. So technically they don't know it's coming, and that is the highest echelons of the staff help us to develop the training. So we don't get the proverbial Monday morning quarterback or the who shot John. We didn't make it up. We worked with your staffs in order to create it, but we do challenge these staffs, and that is one of the positives I think over the past several years is that NATO writ large across the 30 nations have come to realize that it's safe to fail in a training environment, and that's what we attempt to do. But I will share with you in closing in those opening comments to say, completely impressed by my colleagues who I am afforded the opportunity to work with, the analytical rigor, the intellectual capacity, the high level approach at that command. It just has impressed me to no end. And what I share with them all the time is that, the NATO alliance is the preeminent alliance that the world has ever known in the history of mankind. And this is the highlight of my 30+ year career, is to get to work with these professionals in this capacity. Thanks very much.
Sir, yes, thank you. I don't know, do we have Professor Braun on?
Professor Braun, are you able to jump in? As a matter of fact, I'm just now getting the audio, so that's great. I don't have the context, but I can jump in.
Well, Professor Braun, sorry you weren't able to hear the beginning. My name is Colonel Brian Cole. I'm the moderator this morning. I did give you an introduction, and if you're prepared, we can turn over to you to discuss the U.S. Army in the Arctic, if you're ready.
Yes, and I guess I'll just make a couple very brief comments here. The paper that I was first, I very much regret not being able to be with you all. I've wanted to engage this community of scholars and interested practitioners in person and face to face for a long time, but personal circumstances and COVID have prevented that. I was invited by Lon and Jord and Ian to present on a paper that I published, or an unpublished paper that is pending with the Arctic Review and Law and Politics. It actually doesn't deal with U.S. Army strategy in the Arctic specifically, although I can talk to that. It talks about the U.S. Strategy and policy in the Arctic. The big takeaway context for this is the U.S. strategy and policy in the Arctic is not well defined, and that means that the bureaucratic powers and structure of our system will probably influence that where that strategy and our activity will go. As the public and political interest seems to be waning, or at least is a little distracted right now, that is not the case in the security community. So DoD and each of the services have updated their Arctic strategies, and there is a very strong push in those communities to influence what the U.S. is going to do. So that is the gist of my paper and presentation today, is to say that the nuanced understanding of where U.S. security strategy is moving is very likely to influence and get funding from Congress, and therefore it should be of interest to all of our international partners, and it should, that nuanced understanding should inform their engagement with the U.S., particularly military engagement, as we move forward.
Great, thank you, Professor Braun. I guess we could move into, if you'd like to discuss your paper now, we could just go with that.
All right. So the purpose of the paper that inspired the invitation is to provide a comparative analysis of 5 U.S. Arctic security strategies using the Army War College's Ends, Ways, and Means Risk Strategic Analysis Framework. This analysis was intended to offer insight to alternative U.S. Institutional approaches to the Arctic policy. Today, I won't talk to all 5 of them. You know, I picked out the DoD strategy, and then as a surrogate for the DHS strategy, I used the U.S. Coast Guard strategy. And the reason I did that is because the Department of Homeland Security strategy is much broader and takes on several topics that would be foreign to a traditional security analyst. But the U.S. Coast Guard strategy is a good proxy for where the DHS strategy is leading the nation. The central theme of the paper is establishing a nuanced understanding of U.S. Arctic security strategies to inform Western nations' military engagement behavior to advance their Arctic interests. So it's to look at U.S. security strategy so that foreign nations or our partners and allies can engage the U.S. in a way that advances or influences the U.S. to adopt patterns that will be useful to their interest. So the description of the problem for both the paper and this presentation starts with many of the things we talked about yesterday. Climate change is opening the Arctic. Opening of the Arctic has stimulated U.S. interest among multiple stakeholders and across multiple dimensions of interest, including environmental protection, economic opportunity, sovereignty, jurisdictional authorities, international law associated with those jurisdictional authorities, human security, and then the thing that I'm most interested in, which is traditional security communities of interest. Genesis of this Arctic awakening in the U.S. may have originated with the U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council. Regardless, this resurgence of U.S. interest in the region is, and the direction the U.S. strategy and policy take towards the Arctic is at an inflection point. Public and political interest in the Arctic seems to be waning. However, the formerly lagging U.S. security enterprise interest in the Arctic is actually achieving its apex. The Department of Defense and the security enterprise in the United States is well funded and proactive, and for that reason, security practitioners and a strategy planning perspective, the Arctic future environment really could be characterized as an opportunity long awaited for, or a recipe for disaster. Which bureaucratic power influences debate in the U.S., or which international partner influences the debate from abroad will likely determine the future U.S. national policy, strategy, and behavior in the Arctic. So the specific evidence that there's kind of a silence right now from the Biden administration and a waning public interest is that the President Biden has said very little about the Arctic, and his administration has said very little about the Arctic. He has rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, and he has imposed a moratorium on oil and leasing in the Arctic and National Wildlife Refuge of Alaska. Secretary of State Blinken at the Arctic Council ministerial meeting here in Iceland in May characterized the administration's policy toward the Arctic as being committed to advancing a peaceful Arctic region and a spirit of cooperation. But then he immediately placated both European allies and domestic audiences by expressing concern over Russia's behavior in the Ukraine, human rights abuses, cyber activity, which interfered with the U.S. elections. The Russian behavior in other regions, like the 2014 sensitivity remark from a panel one yesterday, is important and it can't be ignored. But it should not necessarily dominate our engagement with Russia relative to the Arctic. The other, kind of key thing is that the from a national perspective, the Obama administration's Arctic policy is the last legacy document trying to articulate the vision for the United States. And all of this shows that the U.S. Political community is not as interested right now in trying to establish a vision and push the direction of how the U.S. is going to behave in the Arctic as it once was. Its interest is waning. But the renewed Arctic strategies within the Department of Defense, and particularly the U.S. Coast Guard in the Department of Homeland Security, shows an increasing interest within the security community. So I digress a bit. What the essence of the motivational pitch or thesis for this presentation is, it is very likely that security-informed emphasis in the United States will establish momentum for how the U.S. is going to behave in the Arctic, and that's important for our international partners to care about. So I'll touch on a couple highlights here of the paper's analysis. And it gets down to really two things. The DoD and DHS perspectives on the Arctic are aligned in the sense that they are all nested under the former Obama administration's strategy perspectives and the current, and it seems enduring, objectives of U.S. policy for the Arctic, which is maintaining a peaceful and secure environment that is marked by cooperation and mutual interest. However, DoD is much more confrontational and enforcement oriented, while the DHS strategy, as articulated in the Coast Guard strategy, is much more cooperative and looking to manage the competition by participating with our competitors, principally Russia, to compete in a way that maintains the security. And so the real bottom line is that the U.S. Coast Guard approach appears much more cooperative and engaged, while the DoD approach appears to be much more confrontational and enforcement. This is expressed, and the paper goes into it in more detail, with the notion of challenging Russia with things like freedom of navigation exercises, or presence exercises, or military exercises with our partner in Europe to show that the U.S. is there and is willing to commit to defend its or express its position on our security interests, where the Coast Guard position talks about the need for competition does not preclude cooperation, and they are very involved in the systems and mechanisms of defining what international law is as it emerges in the region. This is particularly true with fisheries and search and rescue operations and maritime transport and the like. And they appreciate the ever evolving nature of that relationship. So they're there to enforce and protect U.S. interests, but they are doing it as a cooperative and engaged member, not an external body that's going to come in and establish or test U.S. authority and sovereignty in the region. I'm going to go ahead and jump very to the kind of the end of my prepared remarks here, but some of the key findings and recommendations of my paper. The U.S. is more interested now than a couple of decades ago, starting with the when the community got involved during the U.S. Lead of the Arctic Council. DoD's approach is confrontational and enforcement oriented, while DHS, through the Coast Guard surrogate approach, is much more inclusive and cooperative, and they are willing to work with and develop the laws and policies of the Arctic to include bringing Russia on board or negotiating with Russia for what the nature of those laws and policies should be. The DoD's most vital role, and the recommendation I make there is that we should probably explore Arctic security issues through the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, allowing the U.S. Coast Guard to take the lead in establishing the tone or the tenor of U.S. involvement in the Arctic. I fear that if DoD's current interest in the Arctic becomes predominant with our culture of being confrontational and fairly direct in enforcement, it will be an escalating mechanism where I think that the DHS and Coast Guard will not produce that result.
Well, Professor Braun, I think we're going to need to move on to other panelists at
Go
this
ahead.
point. This is a remarkable thesis in that, especially the nuanced approach that is necessary toward Arctic and Arctic strategies, because essentially, even with competition, the Arctic for decades has been marked by cooperation as well. But let's for the moment move on to. We'll start with Dr. Strauss here and the discussion of the paper with the other panelists of the Marine Corps and the EABO concept in the Arctic. Dr. Strauss?
Thank you. And thank you for everyone for showing up, those online and those here in person. Really appreciate it. I look forward to having this discussion. I'll attempt to keep my remarks somewhat short, just to set the stage. Paint kind of a picture, allow some time for my co-authors to also jump in to give some key highlights, and then get us to some Q&A where I think some goodness will happen here. So if you would allow me just a moment to kind of paint a picture for you. If you could imagine, say, an open field completely covered in white in snow, not being able to necessarily tell, say, how deep it is. It's that nice crisp snow with a little glitter on top of it as the sun glances off of it. And then the crunch of, say, a heavy tank, say an M1 Abrams tank, right, rolling through the snow, creating a pathway, right? That's what happened just a few years ago in Trident Juncture, right, where the Marines participated with NATO in one of the largest NATO exercises, right, to take place for years. And the Marine Corps is moving away from that, as we know. I think most of us know, with Force Design 2030, with the tentative manual of Expeditionary Advanced Based Operations, or EABO. The Marine Corps has divested itself of these tanks and moved into a what we would call a lighter direction away from being heavy toward more of a reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance role, as the Commandant has expressed, the 5 CSIR role. And I'll leave that for people to Google to discover what that means if you don't know. So our paper, the way we approached this was more of engaging this conversation or weighing in on this conversation. There's a lot of discussion of Force Design 2030. There's a lot of discussion about EABO, but coupling that with the Department of the Navy's new strategies. In December of 2020, the Navy came out with this tri-service maritime strategy. And then just a month later, in January of 2021, the Secretary of the Navy signed the blueprint for the Arctic, or the Blue Arctic strategy. And there hasn't been enough discussion, at least in our circles, of that Blue Arctic strategy and where the Marine Corps' direction is going and how, say, it fits underneath that strategy. So again, I won't go into great detail here, but anyone that has paid attention to these conversations or read these strategies or read national level US strategies, everyone would be able to notice, just from the language, that there is a focus on China. Russia is called out, but there is a shift toward the Indo-Pacific. EABO specifically uses language to suggest that that is the focus for that tentative manual. Therefore, the question that arose in our mind was, if this is the doctrine, or if this is the concept that the U.S. Marine Corps is going to train on, is going to design its force toward, to engage with a possible adversary, assumably China, in an Indo-Pacific theater, how does this apply for the Marine Corps as they have to engage in other areas of the globe? Specifically, in this case, the Arctic. So there's a definite shift, and I think everyone would agree there's a shift in how the Marine Corps then works with our NATO partners due to force design and due to this concept. Although, again, we're definitely working a lot of the hiccups out, and we're exercising this, and nothing is completely set in stone. This certainly evidence of that is the Commandant's follow-on article not that long afterward to include sea denial and Marines conducting ASW, or anti-submarine warfare, right? So again, this becomes a question of, in the Arctic, how will this play out? One of the major assumptions, or one of the major arguments that EABO makes, is that the Marine Corps is going to focus itself on being the stand-in force. Because adversaries' weapons are standoffish, in the sense of the scale, the length, distance, and the deadliness of these weapons create sort of an area that would be very difficult to cross through, right, to get to, say, the fight, or to get to our allies and our partners. So if Marines are lighter, able to move around, they're dispersed in an AO, they're harder to target. Of course, they are more survivable, but the Commandant likes to remind us that's not the only reason we're doing this. So they are more difficult to target, and they create a dilemma for our adversary. They create a dilemma for their thinking. At the same time, they're raising, say, an anti-air umbrella, an anti-sea, or this sea denial umbrella that extends out, that then hopefully will create a space to allow for follow-on forces to come in, right? I mean, again, I'm generalizing kind of and summarizing this concept of a stand-in force. Well, odds are the Marines in the Arctic will be less likely to be that stand-in force. Our allies and partners in Norway, they're there. So they definitely, they are a stand-in force, and they like to tell us that they're our stand-in force. They are the stand-in force because they are there. You guys aren't going anywhere. However, for the Marines to come in, we don't have permanent basing in Norway for very good reason. There's a 1949 law in Norway to not have foreign permanent troops, right, in Norway. Certainly there are exercises in Norway that Marines are participating in. Usually small scale, sometimes larger, but again, it's not permanent. So the question then arises with, say, a Russian bastion defense that's going to look to deny access through the Greenland, Iceland, UK, Norway gap. And I have there was a map that I had, if we could share that too, just to give a sense of the weapons ranges. I thought it would be good, and that way you're not also just staring at my face. Right, the extension, the distance, and the scale of the weaponry has grown longer, where they can reach that gap. And then there are questions of how would they extend out, say, their own capabilities to extend their own A2AD umbrella, if you will, to cover that gap and stop, say, U.S. forces from getting in. So then we get into a more naval maritime team fight of how the Marine Corps and the Navy would insert themselves through this, say, bastion defense to get to Norway, right? So in this case, conceptually, we're not saying that the concept is bad or the concept is erroneous. We are saying that there are gaps that we need to be thinking about. Because the concept is focused on a separate AO, when applied to this AO, creates certain contextual problems. And especially when the underlying assumptions aren't necessarily there, this idea of Marines being that stand-in force. Also recognizing that we're going to be in a joint multinational fight, right? But this seems to be a discussion, at least in our halls, and at least I think in some of the articles that have been coming out, it's a discussion that has gone a little bit to the wayside. So it's one that we thought we could bring to the fore here. So I'll leave my comments there, painting this picture, and allow my co-authors, Ryan and Mike, to see if you have anything you want to add.
Maybe if I just might, Ryan or Mike, whoever wants to jump in, maybe at the EABO, for those in the audience who aren't Marines, you could start maybe just a quick explanation of what that is.
So what I understand it to be, based off the tentative manual EABO, is the ability for the Marine Corps to, in dispersed format structure, seize advanced naval bases, now expeditionary advanced naval bases, not much far off where our original mission was. And in that, provide pressure against any naval actor in support of our fleet, whether that's sea denial or support to the fleet or any other naval actors. So what I looked at the paper was the tactical problem, and being one of 8 battalion commanders that is in 2nd Marine Division, we have 2 parts to our mission. One is to support the unit deployment programs, the Okinawa or UDP, which is right in the heart and center of the EABO problem. And the second is to deploy and support theater security cooperation in MAR4 year and MAR4 F, and potentially support, as required, any deployments to MAR4 CENT. So those problem sets in front of us, and my task to execute MRFE, the Marine Rotational Force Europe, last sustained deployment beginning of this year. I had to look at how the future that applied to our Marine Corps battalions, how would they apply to theater security cooperation, which in essence is deterrence, reassuring our allies to be a credible force in that sub-theater. So with that, I looked at the problem that was in northern Norway, and with our partners, specifically Brigade North, and looked at what their capabilities were of the Norwegian Army and what our capabilities are. How would these changes that EABO and force design is driving us to, how could we reinforce each other? The problem sets, the advantage was I was also 2nd Marine Division planner for Trident Juncture. So I got a chance to see 2nd Marine Division wrestle with the problem of trying to drive methodical battle through south of Trondheim and then get the assistance from a new BLT landing off the flank, and then how to reinforce those 2 efforts as they continue to try to apply methodical battle with artillery, tanks, through one line of communication. When you transfer with the EABO disaggregated design, The problem becomes without duration suppression that allows us to get it wrong but still get it right. How do you chew through a defense and achieve a position advantage? When the Echo 6, the European Road 6, that is the primary artery of the North, it really only facilitates a brigade frontage and sometimes a battalion frontage that there is no place to bypass unless you choose to bypass in the sea. So unless we're able to be flexible enough to be deployed and survive and thrive in small elements, company to platoon even size elements, and then re-aggregate at another position advantage, we are still challenged to demonstrate a credible force that can sustain combat operations.
Thank you, Ron. Mark, yeah, comments?
Yes, sir. So just that we appreciate the opportunity to explore this topic. It was, as Dr. Strauss said, with a number of national service level documents out there, we wanted to explore the problem and the challenges that are out there and begin the conversation. It's not just us. It's you see us around the table and we have different backgrounds, but we're informed by the experiences that we brought to bear from the past and the years of folks that have gone before us here. So the commandants put it out there, and Admiral Gilday and Admiral Schultz as well talked about that. We got to modernize. We've got to prepare for the future fight. What does that mean? So we've got to lay down. We did the hard work to sit down and analyze what exists out there and where this is going. So with the benefit of so much experience from Dr. Strauss and Colonel Gordinier here, what he's been doing here, we tried to put that into that paper to explore things. So it's an opportunity to offer a path forward. And as it's been said here around the table, there's a lot of exploration going on. There are a lot of good ideas out there. We're going to begin that step forward to face this future fight, what it's going to be like for us. So we appreciate that opportunity.